will now be handing over to Josh Cockroft, who's the data lead from Esme Fairbairn. And Josh, I believe you're speaking to us about your work collaborating with funders on the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Data Standard.
That's right. In 2019, the funders for Racial Equality Alliance began to talk about how to get a picture of how much funding is being distributed to what were then being termed BAME-led organisations. And because there was obviously a lot of, there were even at that stage, pre-George Floyd, there was a lot of conversations about how funding was being distributed, but no one really had a very clear picture of where the money was actually going and what the scale of the problem really was. So I was part of a subgroup of that who devised a fairly, and this was a group of about, I don't know, about 15 funders or so who've been convening for about a year or two on a kind of variety of subjects in the space around improving equity within funding. I was part of the group who put it in to devise a way of auditing people's members' portfolios so they could see what proportion of funding was going to BAME-led groups. And so we put together a, frankly, fairly quick and dirty approach of how funds could go about doing this. And while our intentions were definitely right, and it was a good first effort, the methodology was far from ideal. We developed it without consultation with the sector. We were only looking at race, which is the remit of funders alliance. It wasn't granular at all, so very much using this top-level BAME acronym. And probably most problematic, it relied on funders making judgments about their grantees. But we went ahead with the audit and we collected some interesting data, and we're now in that project now collecting its second round, which is about to be published at some point in the next couple of months, which I know some of you have contributed to. But I think that, it wasn't either broad enough because it only focused on race, and it wasn't detailed enough to get a really good picture of the sector. So in summer last year, I approached Funder Collaboration, who was the chair of the DEI coalition, who are the other group of funders working together to collaborate on issues around diversity, with the idea of developing a more robust framework on how to capture diversity data. She was also being interested in having some conversations in this area, and we set about reaching out through our networks to all the funders that we knew were either interested in doing something, or that we at least heard them mention talking about diversity, to join a working group to discuss the problem and work out where to go from here. So we convened an initial group of about 15 funders, and also engaged 360 Giving, who obviously collate open funding data. And we encouraged 360 to, at that initial meeting, to submit a proposal on how to go about how they might approach collecting diversity data, which is something they've been working out in any case. And that first meeting worked out quite well. All the funders were keen to do something in the space. 360 Giving were keen to do something too, and they worked up off the back of the meeting, they worked up a full proposal, which was then at the next meeting going to be funded by Esme and Lottery. Since then, so the group has continued to meet monthly for the last year. It's chaired by myself and John Knights from Lottery. And so over the last year, the project's gone ahead pretty much as planned, actually, perhaps remarkably enough, with 360 Giving doing an initial literature review identifying any best practice. They then commissioned another consultancy, the TSI consultancy, aka Bonnie Chu, to consult with specialist organisations and experts to develop a taxonomy of characteristics that everyone could agree on as far as possible. So obviously things are never quite perfect. We've agreed a framework for what questions could be asked of organisations. So there are kind of 3 different areas to look at for an organisation about their mission, their leadership, and their beneficiaries, and agreed thresholds for that, and various other minutiae detail which are quite crucial to understand, to be able to collect the data in a way that is accurate, granular, but also without breaking any GDPR standards and so on. And most recently, the lottery has now implemented the standard and will begin to publish an open data to 360 Giving in the coming months. Esme are beginning implementation now, as are a number of other funders as well. over the course of last year, another about 10 funders and social investors have also joined the working group. Most recently, which I'm very happy about, is Arts Council England will be involved as well going forward. So, I mean, I'm really happy with how the last year has gone with the group. We've kind of achieved what we were actually setting out to do. We've had people who have remained committed, and it looks like, I mean, obviously the proof is in the pudding, and we'll see. We'll be able to find out in a number of years' time how many funders are actually, you know, using a publishing to the standard. But I think it's a very good start. So, in terms of my top tips of what's worked, I think there are kind of a few aspects to it. I think getting a critical number of funders interested in the space is quite important. We initially recruited them on a one-to-one basis using our networks, which made it much more difficult for people to say no to your face rather than sending out a blanket email. I think a bit of strong arming definitely helps. We had a very clear set of objectives which were discrete, so people knew what they were going to get into. They knew they were going to be building one specific product, effectively contributing towards that, and that is the entire remit of that group. And all the work around it will be based around that. In terms of, we kept the actual agenda and conversations and we can very focused around that. So we didn't have any diversions. So it was just about that. We didn't get into the kind of larger ethical philosophical questions about what is right which are all important conversations to have, particularly around diversity, but we felt that sort of, you know, we're trying to achieve something specific here, so let's keep it tight and focused around that. Once we had our initial funders down as members, we have continued to actively seek out members and have also impressed upon all members that the group is very much an open group to anyone working in this area. So whenever I hear about any funder who's doing anything in the space through my colleagues at ESME and elsewhere, I immediately email them to try and co-opt them into the group, which is a really decent success rate. And we also, and to the center, we also put all our resources in terms of reference to the group, the outputs that we're creating, the frameworks and so on, our contact details, all on the Funder Collaborative Hub microsite page that we have on there. So it's all public and people can see all the information there and then get in contact with us if there's anything they want to do. We're very much trying to make ourselves a public point of contact. So part of the rationale for this was really to prevent the work from being duplicated by any other funders or any other consultancy groups. So whenever we heard about anything related to diversity and data, or just diversity really, we reached out to them and tried to do our best to definitely invited them and tried to co-opt them into joining, which, as I say, has worked out reasonably well in terms of people coming along. And I think has helped in perhaps there not being multiple efforts going at the same time. We got the DEI coalition on board, we got the Funder Collaboration Policy Alliance on board, who obviously ran the previous version of the project, and they all now signed up, if not members, at least backers of the project. And then I think finally, because and this is quite important too, because we made a grant early on, actually two of our members, and ourselves at ESME and Lottery, made a grant early on to 360 Giving, who were paid to carry on work which is central to the group, which meant that you had paid people who were kind of continuing to drive it forward. There was always something you to talk about every month. And you had that kind of, I mean, they were not responsible for the secretariat or the running of the group or convening. That was very much myself and John. But there was always a kind of points of discussion. It was never just the 25 was sitting around waiting for just discussing, oh, what are we going to talk about next time? There was always decisions to be made, and I think that was quite a big help. So it felt like then it was an active, continuous process, and it could feed in as we went along. So I think that's it really. So I think that's hopefully some semblance of why it worked, and I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Josh. And I think it's been great to hear from a collaboration that has really focused on actually collaborating around aspects of funders' own practice. I think it's often we think about collaborations being very much directed about, you know, the issues that we're funding, who we're giving the money to, and perhaps not as often focus on kind of how we do it as funders. And I think around data in particular, it has the potential to underpin so much more and better collaboration, actually, if we can find common approaches to making good use of the data that we have or could be gathering. So thank you for sharing your insights on that, Josh. And I should have mentioned actually in introducing Josh that Josh is also a really key member of the team that has been delivering the work of the hub over the past year, and I think we'll be drawing on your data expertise increasingly as we go into the next phase of designing our services.